how do you think people ought to approach these seemingly intractable arguments that just devolve into ad hominems on the left and right?
So this is very tricky, isn't it? So let's abstract from the particular case for now.
Yeah.
Where there's really deep-seated disagreements, sometimes the best policy is just not to engage. So I'm thinking that there really are views that it's kind of a waste. It's likely to be a waste of time to engage with them. So the kind of thing I've got in mind is young Earth creationism, right? There's a wealth of stuff out there in textbooks for high school, university, and so on about biology and about geology and about physics and so on that represents a kind of accumulation of at least 5 centuries worth of serious scientific investigation. Right. If you want to have an argument and try and defend young Earth creationism, make sure you've gone and read all of that stuff first. And I would think if you did and you read it with it at all kind of in a kind of informed way, you just would give up your young Earth creationism. So I'm not going to do your work for you, right? It's not up to me to help you. I mean, yeah, it's sort of unfortunate that you've ended up in the spot that you're in where for various reasons you're cut off from a whole lot of knowledge that's worth having. But it's not my job to solve that problem for you, right? So I really don't want to talk to you. Now you might not think that's right, but that's one kind of case, I think. And even if you don't like that particular case, you might think it applies elsewhere.
Well, if they're not, the problem with engaging in that situation is if your interlocutor is not convinced by the wealth of information available to them that you find absolutely persuasive, it's unlikely that you're going to find something else to persuade them with.
Well, indeed, right. And so it's best that we just go our separate ways, I think. Okay, so that's one kind of case. Suppose that it's not that, we don't think it's that kind of case. And I mean, that one was kind of factual, but there might be normative cases like that too. I mean, I don't know. I know it kind of gets harder now. Suppose that you're pretty rusted on Democrat and we've got a Trump supporter. And the two of you might look at each other these days and think, we're not going to find common ground right? The kind of time for us to engage with one another is kind of never, right? Now, that might sound like counsel of despair, and maybe you have to pick and choose and so on. But there might be cases where in that kind of situation, it's just better for the two parties to walk away as well. So I'm curious to know what you think about that case as well.
Well, if things are getting quite animated and angry, then I would be personally always disengaging. But I mean, I also don't really want to get into the specifics of the current dispute, but in general, I'm quite in favor of pushing free speech as far as I can. So I don't want anybody handing out information on how to build a nuclear bomb in your sink. But otherwise, I mean, I'm pretty lenient, or I'd like to be accepting or tolerant of as much free speech as possible. But I've had a lot of discussions with friends who don't feel that way. And when I'm having those discussions, my modus operandi is to be as empathetic as possible and try to figure out just what premises they are operating on that I don't agree with. And I often find that it comes down to almost like a matter of taste, or it's like an aesthetic determination, or it's really something ethical that I don't know how to adjudicate any further. And I just have to accept things the way that they are. And it's going to be difficult to form a formulate a compelling argument.
So, so I'm definitely what you just said. I'm definitely in favour of if you've got two people, what you want then, two people who disagree about stuff, is you want them to share their views so that there's understanding on both sides about what the position of the other person really is. What you don't want is one person saying, "Oh," to the other person, "You believe these things, but look what follows," when they don't believe those things. That's and there's lots of that sort of misunderstanding that goes on because we have stereotypes, especially about small groups that we're not part of, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm in favour of once you're in dialogue with somebody, making a real effort to find out what they think and taking
Mm-hmm.
seriously what they say, because people can say things and the other person can just refuse to hear it. So they
Mm-hmm.
think that you believe that P, and you assert not P in 7 different ways, and they still think that you believe that P, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not productive either when you're really trying to enter into a conversation with somebody.
I think one difficulty with humans and being human that maybe isn't totally taken into account by your conception with what a compelling argument is that if we feed a contradiction into a computer, they'll just break. The computer
Yeah.
will just break. But people are often quite content to hold contradictory views and act in contradictory fashion. So, I mean, I am on the one hand quite interested in preserving my health and being fit, but I also really love ice cream and eat a lot of it. And I know that it's not good for me. I understand that it's a contradiction, but uh, you just couldn't compel me with any sort of reasonable argument to stop doing so.
So I was careful to talk initially about absurdity rather than about contradiction, because I mean
Ah,
maybe we just handle this
mm-hmm,
by going paraconsistent, allowing that there are tolerable contradictions, and your
mm-hmm,
contradiction with the ice cream is maybe just one of those tolerable ones, right?
yeah,
But there are certainly things that are beyond the pale. So in math, 0 equals 1, I take it, is just an absurdity that nobody can
yeah,
tolerate. And so that's what I had
mm-hmm,
in mind. And I shifted from there to talking about the classical case because it's the easiest case, right? Classical logic is just completely straightforward and easy to understand. Um,
mm-hmm,
but it's also the case that um, we can be in this situation where we don't know how to resolve a contradiction in our beliefs for a long time. And we can, in that sense, we can maintain the contradiction. But what I think we should be doing is trying to look for some way to resolve it if we're in that situation. If we're not doing anything about it, right? My views entail that 0 equals 1, but I don't care. Sounds like that's not good, right?
mm-hmm. We also in in this situation when we're philosophizing, we want to imagine that we're dealing with ideal agents because if we're not, then maybe we ought to be doing psychology instead.
Right. So that's complicated too, um, but I think that maybe we don't want to be thinking about necessarily about ideal agents. We want to be thinking about ourselves because it's, I think, useful for philosophers to find out that there are contradictions in their views, right? So Russell
Yes.
wrote his letter to Frege, and Frege probably wasn't overly pleased to receive it in one sense, but in
Mm-hmm.
another sense, surely he was, because it meant he didn't go to press with something that was then going to be pointed out to him later on. Right. I mean, that's a
Right.
favourite example of mine. Now, maybe that's a bit remote from everyday experience, but it's
Yeah.
still the case that um, part of the currency in human interaction, part of what gives you standing is your knowing stuff. and you're being a kind of reliable informant about stuff. And if your views lead to contradiction, that tends to undermine the word gets around, it tends to undermine your standing as a knowledgeable person. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I do think that we can think about this not just in terms of some sort of idealization, but actually in terms of just ordinary people.